And I will, rather than showing you office in Claremont, show you some slides to orient the main points that that I'd like to cover with you. I want to be really brief and leave mostly time for us to talk together. And my thesis is rather simple to follow. It is not a speed bump, since that was our question. I'm the president of the Institute for Ecological Civilization. We are one of two nonprofits that was born out of the major international conference that John Cobb led in 2015 here at the Claremont Colleges. We started work on that. John, I think the first meeting with you was 2010. So I think of it as 5 years in active planning and work. 1,500 people, 82 working groups, plenaries at Big Bridges on Pomona College campus of 2,000 people. And the theme was seizing an alternative toward an ecological civilization. Seizing an alternative. Today's Zoom call feels like we are in some ways looking at that alternative, that possibility today. John had a talk once to one of the annual conferences of a liberal Protestant denomination. I put that on the screen. I find myself asking now, were the things that I was doing before Friday, March 13th, terribly important? I wonder if some of you find yourselves also re-evaluating. When I get back to working, socializing, traveling, will I be doing things that now seem as important as what we as a global community are going through in these days? How can I take the sector in which I work, the job that I hold, my religious community, my other groups, AA or whatever the communities are that I'm a part of, and make sure that that work does seem to be terribly important? We have, I actually remember, John, the morning after the election, an email from you saying in 2016, maybe this had to happen. And maybe this in the blatancy of, say, yesterday's press conference, which you may have seen moments of, a British commentator said it was like a 70-year-old toddler having a fit, except that this is the man leading the most powerful nation in the world. It allows us, I think, to see the absurdity of the ways that we've been organizing society maybe more clearly than we might have done otherwise. And therefore, to see the options more starkly. I think this is a moment for me when we see the options before us in their differences more starkly than ever before. The coronavirus, in my view, is absolutely not the great equalizer. It is the force that pulls the curtain away from those things that have been hidden in the system and makes the disparities in how we live much, much more clear. And really, it helps us recognize that all of us in this call are in the 1%. And it's the homeless people, the people in prisons, the people in the communities in South Africa, where I was just a few months ago, who have no chance to wash hands or have a family bathroom or be 2 meters apart from other people, who are the 99%. I'm not going to take a lot of time to argue why I think it's not a speed bump, but this is data that most of you will already know. The scientific data, the virology on the transmission of the virus show that this is something that as soon as we relax the strictest limitations on interaction, we start to see increases in sickness and death again. This morning there was a debate, will the American Academy of Religion, the world's largest meeting of academics and religion, meet in late November 2020? Can you have 10,000 people in a convention center in Boston? And the experts said, virtually no chance. So we're looking at changes to the way we interact with other human beings that continue definitely through 2020 and further beyond that. Is it at some point we have a vaccine and relatively accurate ways to evaluate whether somebody is sick, maybe asymptomatically, or has been sick, has the antibodies? But in an interconnected world, we have good reason to think that this kind of pandemic, as long as there are viruses, will continue to hit us, and there is not, and will, in scientifically speaking, not likely be a way to take from an outbreak of a virus to an effective vaccine that can be widely available in weeks or even months. That number, for scientific reasons, looks like it will continue to be very long. That means, for me, a long-term change. The economic data, I'd let you all who are even better informed than I am talk more about the impact of what we currently see of a global shutdown on individuals, on small businesses, and for me, fascinatingly, on governments. There was an article this morning in The Guardian, I think it was, saying that, oh, we're going to be fine because we've realized that governments can create money. And so they will create money to keep financial systems working. But that's actually not true. When a government doesn't have, when it creates too much inflation by creating too much money, then you begin to have the collapse of structures. And as John said in his comments a few minutes ago, that when global capitalist powers want to increase the effects of runaway inflation on a nation that they don't like, they have very effective ways to do that, to bring that nation to its knees, primarily through the suffering of the individuals. To read the other day that some of the countries that are threatened with insolvency include such major geopolitical players as Turkey and South Africa. You recognize that governments are not free from the long-term effects of this. And for me, the single most painful datum came out a few days ago that it's expected that 500 million people will fall into below the poverty line, which, by the way, is a very, very low bar as a result of COVID-19. So is this the collapse or one of many little collapses? And John Cobb has talked about, and other economists have talked about late capitalism and whether we would expect to see just a single collapse or one of many smaller mini collapses. I won't even speculate on the question. I think we don't know. I am inclined to say it's one of many little collapses. But what we do know, these are the principles that we have to keep in mind, I think, that biological systems are interconnected. So when you have a humanity that travels and has a frequency of contact that humans have, then viruses that affect part of humanity are almost immediately threats to all of humanity. So pandemic is a threat that's here to stay. And economic systems are interdependent, which means that as much as you can pretend that that one economic system can weather the storm, the data is against that. I should have added as a third point that this planet is finite, so that our consumption rate and the byproducts of our consumption will continue to rise. Our level of activity and our level of consumption are far beyond what the finite planet can bear. Those remain for me the three most important of the insights. In a finite system, the future will not necessarily be similar to the past. What's next after pandemic is one of the questions that John Fahey asked us to think about here, and that's the one I want to close with. I think we have some tasks, and the first one is what to think. How will we, such as the people on this call and the people we have influence on, think differently as a response? And I'll just quickly flash what I think are the challenges for us. Can each of us be clear and able to communicate clearly what are the trends that we're looking at? in global development in terms of human community, governments, finances and markets, educational system, values. Can we, as we think about the world past this pandemic, can we name the trends that have brought us to this date? Can we name the decision points that where humans can make a decision to go left or to right, to respond in a particular way? And as long as we're clear that there are decision points, can we name the long-term goals for a sustainable human presence on this planet? Those, I think, are the action points for us as individuals to be able to state these in clear and powerful ways. And then, can we help as many people as possible to see that these goals are crucial and then to live accordingly? What to build is the next question. John spoke a little bit about the article on Venezuela. The key idea, communities of communities, that we move from a level at which humans are working together for the common good of those in their community. That's a biological given. That's how we evolved as a species to learn that. It's a position called communitarianism. I'm working with another Claremont graduate on a book on the new communitarianism and the way that after the virus, this is, I believe, the building point. I think this is a strong point that I've learned from John Cobb and that we share in common. It doesn't mean abolishing trade or giving all over to government ownership. So it's not to be confused with a sort of state-centered socialism. Communitarianism is a very different sort of notion. It ties in with localism, the belief that the local contexts are crucial to a long-term sustainable human civilization on the planet, and to a bioregionalism, that is, we learn to live off of the resources that are in our neighborhood, ecologically speaking. And finally, it means that we learn to think sector by sector of where we should make the changes, and then how to interlink those changes across sectors. Let me just show that in terms of a picture. This is the standard view of the social, economic, and ecological dimensions of human life, with sustainability in that middle portion. The key thing is that all of human activities are located within that broadest green circle, the environment, that society lives only if it has an equilibrium with the broader planetary environment, and that economy is a portion of society rather than, as many people would like to draw it, we have the economy as the largest box, environment perhaps off on a corner somewhere, and society is at getting its raison d'etre only from economic well-being. We need to reverse that circle. We need to see that the sectors are interrelated, that interfuse, that they grow into each other and depend on each other. And if there are inconsistencies between them, that will finally mean an unsustainable society. If we can see that the broadest framework for us are the terms around the outside, and that we have to live within that, what here is called the environmental ceiling, that's the safe and just space for humanity, that the social foundations, as they're listed in the inner circle, are the foundations. So we live between our foundation and our ceiling. That's the only space that, that humanity can live in a sustainable way on this planet. In EcoCiv, we have tried to identify some of these sectors and to give them individually attention, even while we know that they're interconnected in the long run. In each case, and this I think was one of the major things at John's conference in 2015, is to recognize each of the kinds of transformations, re-envisionings, reimaginings, reinventings that need to be a part of that transition. So in EcoCiv, we've, starting just after the conference, began to work across these various sectors in the attempt to see, where's the change need to be. I think I'll skip over that, and just to say that The activity over the last weeks has been intense. We've had 6,000 downloads of a meeting that we brought together the chief economist of the United Nations, the most prominent environmentalists of India, Vandana Shiva, the co-president of Club of Rome, and others to talk about what's next after the pandemic. And please watch on ecociv.org for the next meeting, which will be led by Andrew Schwartz in 2 weeks. I think it's the 27th of April. So in conclusion, it seems funny after such mega comments, but I want to say don't ignore the little things. We need to be involved in thought change, in work on new paradigms, but even more in lifestyle change. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to end with, leave 3 questions for you to think. How will you think differently? How will you think differently after the pandemic? How can you organize smaller scale communities? How can you retain these different lifestyles among friends and family? And how can you expand these innovations to the community level? Thanks very much.